Okay, so we are in the third message of this series, Achievable Faith. And the name of this series is Achievable Faith because we're following the prophets Elijah and Elisha. Because a lot of times when we go through scripture, these people seem like superheroes. The faith that they had and the things that they did, it does not seem possible. There's many believers that believe that the gifts of the Spirit ceased and that God can't work that way today. Well, that's not true. He still works that way today. We can have that faith, but it's hard because we don't know how to get there. What does that look like? Today's topic is fear cripples. Fear cripples. Now, last week we talked about the prophet Elijah and how he had this kind of like a religious UFC throwdown between the prophets of Baal and God, and fire came down, swallowed up Elijah's sacrifice, and then he said, kill the Baal prophets. And in many ways, and then right after that, he went and he prayed for rain. And he prayed 3 times. Then there was a cloud that came up out of the sea and gave rain because they had been in a drought for so long. Well, in many ways, just that whole scenario right there makes this seem so impossible, so inhuman. How could anyone do that? Now, you would think that after an awesome encounter like that, before, if we were to do this before the entire nation of in America or something, and we're going to have a throwdown to find out whose God is real. And if God were to answer that way, you would think the entire nation just got to see how God answers your prayer, both in the rain and the fire, that you'd be pretty pumped. That, you might go around me like, God and I, we're like this. He answers my prayers. Back off. God and I, we're like this. But that's not so with Elijah, because I want us to also see the human side. That he had moments of weakness too. And sometimes, and the reason this is good to focus on, because sometimes when we experience moments of weakness, we think, I guess that means I'm not good enough. We need to remember that the heroes in the faith, the people that were like, man, we can do better. We want to be like that. They had weaknesses too. They had moments of weakness. So we're going to start in 1 Kings chapter 19. You want to turn there? 1 Kings chapter 19, starting verse 1. This is right after this big showdown. When Ahab got home, he told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, including the way he had killed all the prophets of Baal. So Jezebel sent this message to Elijah. May the gods strike me and even kill me if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you just as you killed them. Elijah was afraid, and he fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servant there. Then he went on alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life, for I know I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. Talk about going from one extreme to another. In the matter of 24 hours, something completely different changed. That's important to recognize, in that he had this incredible mountaintop, and all of a sudden fear overcame him. Fear overtakes Elijah, and he wrestles with the same emotions that each of us wrestle today. The exact same emotions. Should we have used, in our lives, when we have situations of fear, should we use fear as an indicator whether or not we did the right thing? should Elijah have used fear to determine whether or not he actually heard from the Lord? Fire came down from heaven and rain came. But often in our life, when we suddenly become scared, we're filled with doubt. Maybe I wasn't doing what God called me to do. Maybe this was a mistake. Plans that we thought, I'm sure in Elijah's mind, he thought this was going to be the beginning of a new golden age for the nation of Israel, because his heart was really to bring back the people of Israel back to the Lord. And I'm sure he thought this was the beginning. After they see this, everything's going to change. And it didn't. In fact, it got worse. So did he ever hear from God? Well, obviously. Otherwise, fire wouldn't have come down and the rain would not have come. But because he's just like you and me, he did not sit and reason all this out. He was filled with fear and he ran. See, what it tells us is that fear that he had, that tells us that it's evidence that God used Elijah to stir up the hornet's nest. And that's exactly what he did. He kicked the hornet's nest, and when it got big, he ran. As I'm pretty sure all of us would be faced with those same emotions of you would think, well, why would you run? When you have that kind of power, she can't get you. Fear doesn't work that way. When it hits, it's so irrational, and you cannot get past that fear. We love the mountaintop moments. We love the mountaintop moments. You go on a mission trip, you go on a retreat, vacation, you have those mountaintop moments. You go away and you feel like you're so close to the Lord. Go to the ocean, mountains, wherever is your favorite place to kind of go, where you just feel like you're in nature and you're so close to the Lord. And you're in this mountaintop moment that's like, when you go back, you want this closeness to be the same when you go back home. But the problem is we are in a spiritual battle. We are in a spiritual battle. And Satan will send his demons to fill our head with fear and lies. We're in a battle. We need to recognize that this is an attack, that it's a battle. Because sometimes you can take those fear and those lies and own it as, this is just who I am. That's not true either. Now you've accepted the lies. That's not just who you are. Don't accept the lies. Sometimes spiritual attacks of fear and anxiety hit so hard that we must reach out to fellow believers. We can't do it alone because they need to pray over us. Sometimes when the attacks come, you cannot do it alone. Have you ever had so much fear and worry that it almost crippled you to the point that you could not make a decision on anything? Sometimes fear and worry fills us so much that it cripples us into indecision. It's brutal. That is a weapon of the enemy. That's a weapon of the enemy. But here's the first thing I want you to remember. This first point. You are not defined by your struggles. We don't look at the prophet Elijah and just remember him as the prophet that ran away. We recognize his obedience, his boldness, but somehow when we look at him, we don't see his failings and his fear that he also had. But that is part of being human. We are going to have those ups and downs. We're not robots. He was a person too, who had hopes and dreams for the nation of Israel to come back to God, and something new that he wanted to, I'm sure in his heart, he wanted to witness something amazing take place in the nation of Israel that was so close to his heart. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7 says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline." So the fear and thing that that we might be wrestling with, we need to recognize that this is the flesh and this is a spiritual attack. God did not give us that. God did not give us that. And here's the other thing. As a church, we should never shame or lose patience with those wrestling with fear. Because we need to patiently care for them, pray for them, trust that God is strengthening the body of Christ. I wanted to continue on in verse 5 here. This is powerful because this is the heart of God that is so beautiful. "Then he lay down and slept under the broom tree. But as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and told him, 'Get up and eat.' He looked around, and there beside his head was some bread baked on hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. Then the angel of the Lord came again and touched him and said, 'Get up and eat some more, or the journey ahead will be too much for you.' So he got up and ate and drank, and the food gave him enough strength to travel 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God." Think about that. He is wrestling with such fear. God did not come and kind of kick his feet and say, "What are you doing? Get up." No, he gently, come on, I got some food for you. On hot stones. I mean, that is the love and compassion. A lot of people don't see God in that light in the Old Testament. So I love times like this, that God's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And here he is, God, it pleased the Lord to see Elijah walking in obedience as he did, as he was told to go and challenge the Baal prophets and all that. He walked in obedience. Then in his flesh he was overcome and he was fearful. But God did not come and, "Come on, get going." He was compassionate. He was like, it's someone who might have PTSD. Come on, it's all right. He ate, and then he would say, "I already made you breakfast once." No, I got another meal. You slept. You need good time. But the cool thing is, he had, that was service, because it was on hot stones. And
hot bread.
That's right. And so, it reminds me of, there's this restaurant, and I don't think it's around here. It was quite a bit in Michigan. It's a Black Rock Steakhouse. Is it around here? I don't think so. Okay. So it was a really cool steakhouse that you would go and sit, and they would bring you raw steak on a really hot stone. And you would put the steak on the stone, and you just kind of flip it and let it cook on that hot stone to your taste. However much you want it cooked, and you just put it right there on that hot stone. And so, in many ways, Elijah had a really nice meal on a hot stone, and that's the only time in my life that I've seen anything where we use hot stones for meals like that. But that reminded me of just how much care and intentionality that was. And that it was directly to him, because before, remember, in the first message, he was provided through ravens who brought him bread and meat. This time, the angel of the Lord was there himself and made him a little banquet and cared for him personally. That's beautiful, that kind of compassion that the Lord had. God deeply loves us and cared for Elijah's physical and emotional needs. Sometimes we can get it mixed up and think that, well, it's fine, all our needs are taken care of, everything's fine. But God cares about our emotional needs too. God cares about the things that are heavy on our heart, the fears, the worries that are heavy on our heart. God cares about those too. So I have a very special story that I'm going to share with you here. And the reason I decided to share this story is because I've told many times that, as we are all family here, we identify through our weaknesses, not through strength. And so I want to share a time when I was crippled in fear and how I processed and how I went through that, because I want us to understand that it's not like, because many of you know that I'm a big, tough guy. Martial arts, different things, but I have my limits too. And we need to understand this, how much every single one of us, it does not matter how strong we are or we think we are. We need Jesus because he is our true strength. So, back in February of 2019, you can put up the first slide here. So this is Haiti. We went to Haiti. So my family and I, Carrie's sister is at that time was a missionary in Haiti, along with my brother-in-law, and they're getting ready to move back to the States. And we were, my brother-in-law offered, he's like, hey, if you like, not many of the family had actually ever gone to Haiti to visit them and kind of see their life, see the streets they walked, the ministries that they were involved in. And so they were also having difficulty in kind of bringing all their goods back, the materials. So we went with a lot of empty suitcases so that we could fill as much as possible to bring their belongings back to the States. And also it was a way to kind of be a part. And my brother-in-law, Gami, he was like, and on Saturday, I was going to go up in the mountains and teach like 100 pastors and kind of mentor them. If you want to be a part and help as well, I was like, I would love to. I mean, how often am I in Haiti and be a part of this? Absolutely, I would love that. So we went, and when we arrived in February of 2019, this is pretty much what the streets look like. The streets are normally very busy. The streets are normally packed. In fact, Gami, when he picked us up from the airport, he said, this is a little concerning, it's a little unusual. The streets are normally very busy, and the way the traffic is and how they get around, they don't really, it's just chaos. But as you can see right here, the street is actually quite bare. He said, that's usually not a good sign here. So then, continuing the next slide. This is where we stayed. This is, believe it or not, you can stay in a mansion like this for $1,200 a month in Haiti. It is a beautiful place. Next slide. It was open air. Those aren't screens. It is open air inside this building. Very interesting. Next slide. There's Caden. You had to sleep with the kids had to sleep with the mosquito nets over them because it was open air and warm. It was really hot in February. Next slide. That's them. My parenting style is a little different. I'm like, yeah, guys, just don't die. And and so there's Caden and Azar and cousins. Next slide. So I don't know if you can see, I have another slide there on the rooftop. The rooftops are all covered in shards of glass. They don't have barbed wire or anything on top of the brick, the walls, because they were kind of like in a little compound with a brick wall all the way around their house, and on the top were shards of glass. Next slide. Kids playing on the trampoline. Next slide. There with some of the friends. Next slide. Whatever, as long as they're not dead. It's fine, they're still here. Next slide. See, you can see the glass on top of, that was kind of like their preventative to keep people from climbing over. Next slide. This is on top of the rooftop, you could really parkour between all the buildings. As you can see how closely they are together. It was quite the hangout. So it seemed weird, but like culturally, a lot of people were walking around the roofs. It was interesting. Next slide. And that's the other side. You can see like everything was in, I mean, it's Haiti. Everything was in a constant state of partially built. And then it looked like it had plans because it had rebar sticking out of the roof, like it had plans for maybe a second floor, and they just stopped and never went any further. Next slide. Next slide. The area was beautiful, guys. And that's something that you don't think about when you hear about Haiti. But like I'd climb on the roof just to look at this view, because the mountains around were just, in some of the pictures you'll see, it was like depending on the sunlight, whether it was a sunrise or sunset or how the clouds hit, the mountains looked different every time. It was fascinating. Next slide. Like that one. It was incredible. Just how beautiful the area was. Next slide. Mountains all around. Next slide. Sunset. It was just an incredibly beautiful sunset. All right, next slide. So, as we had gone there, Saturday came, and I was going to go teach with Gami, and he got a call, and he said, "We can't teach today. It's not safe." I was like, "What do you mean?" He said, "There's a lot of rioting taking place in Haiti, and right now some of the rebels and stuff like that, they're not far from where we're supposed to be teaching, so we've canceled it." I'm like, "Oh, okay, that's a bummer." You can do the next one. This is on Sunday morning. Church service going on across the street. I don't know if you can hear it. We're not going to church today because of the protests and the riots. Can't make it. It's unsafe. Across the street, there's church having some good worship going on. So, next day, we were supposed to go to church service. We could not go to church service, and we actually had to stay put because, again, the rioting continued to grow, and now it had grown to this other area. And it left us all kind of with a knot in our stomach of like, how is this going to go? How big is this thing going to be? Is this going to like, we're angry, and then it's going to die down? But for our safety, we'll just not go to church, because where they had to go to church was a little bit further than the church that was across the street. So they did take us. They're like, well, we want to take you someplace because you came to Haiti and you've only been in our house. And so right down the road, this was the orphanage that they've been doing some ministry at, and this was the chapel. Next slide. And this was the orphanage that they had done a lot of work and ministry with. A lot of great stories there. Next slide. And so then they took us from the orphanage. We were able to walk a little bit of a distance to a little village that was very, very remote, and not all the kids are dressed. But these are people that they had been building relationships with, and so they wanted to see them because also these are people that became like family to them in this village, and they were getting ready to leave, and so their heart was breaking, so they wanted to see them as much as they could. They didn't know if it would be the last time. Next slide. That's kind of what their village looked like from the outside. I didn't take any pictures inside because respect their privacy, but that's kind of to give you an idea of what their village looked like from the outside. Next slide. And that's all of us. That's my brother-in-law, Gami, there on the bottom. He served 10 years in the military, and that plays a part of this story as well. Next slide. Okay. Before we go on, so Gami, he spent 10 years in the military. So a lot of his language, he talks about different people. As I say, you hear me say like, I've got a buddy that can do this. He would say, I got a contact, stuff like that. I got a contact to help us with this, or contact help us with that. And so Sunday we're talking, and there were 3 bridges to go to Port-au-Prince, to the airport. And two of the three, he told me Sunday night, two of the three had been overtaken. The police were on those bridges and they were overrun by the rebels. And we only had one bridge, we think, that we can go through and get us to the airport. So I was like, okay, so what do you think we should do? And he said, I think we need to get up, he said, the protests are going really late. They're going, right now it looks like they're gonna be going to like midnight. If we can take it, if they go till midnight, I think our best bet is to get up and get out on the road and head there at like 5 in the morning. They're gonna be asleep and we'll just get through everything while they're asleep and get you to the airport. Even though it's like another 12 hours before our flight takes off, we'll do that so that we can get you to the airport and you'll at least be there. I said, okay, let's do that. So then we get up in the morning and load up the vehicle and we begin to kind of creep out the driveway. And if you ever remember Sound of Music and that scene where they're kind of quietly pushing the car, it felt like that, with our heart was just pumping like this in our chest. Everything was quiet, the city was dark, and the whole family were like, okay, let's go, let's try to get there. We don't make it far, and we hit a barricade of tires in the road. And there's like rocks in the middle. And we stop, Gami and I look at each other and like, okay, you ready? I'm like, let's do it. So we open the door and both him and I go out and we start tossing stuff on the barricade so we have room to get our car in. We jump back in and we're like, okay, let's go. And so we drive, we make it just a little bit further, and now we've come to another barricade, but this time it was all the market tables and chairs that were about 4 feet high piled across this whole thing. I was like, all right, you ready? Let's do this. So we get out and we hustle and we make it about halfway there and big rocks start landing at our feet all around us. We stop and start booking it back to the car, get back into the car. And all of a sudden 3 guys come and surround us with machine guns and they're screaming and yelling. And they're like, roll down the window. And thankfully my brother-in-law was Crail and he was telling them, there's children in here, there's children in here. And they roll down the windows, they're looking, and the guys, and then right after, they come, they're there for a moment, and then a big bang hits the side of the vehicle. Someone had thrown a rock right by Kane, hit right below the window. If it a little higher, would have gone through the window, hit the vehicle, and they're like, hey, they're telling them to stop. Then Gami says, we're trying to take him to the airport. They said, well, we can let you through our checkpoint, but I don't think they're going to be so friendly at the other checkpoints. Okay. We turned around and went back. And I could just hear a child just quietly crying in the back seat. It was just a muffled cry. And everyone was silent. So we went back home, and I tell you guys all this because then, now, everyone went to bed. We're like, I don't know what we're going to do. We're going to sleep when we think about it. I went to bed, and I just curled up in bed, and I cried. I was like, Lord, I didn't come here for this. I came here to help my family bring belongings back. I didn't want to intentionally put my family in harm. I don't know what I'm going to do. Help me, Lord. I am scared. I don't know what I'm going to do. And I just cried. And I slept. And sometimes, when you sleep and you wake up, you feel a little better. And I woke up. And I got up and I went out, and my brother-in-law was like, so I was talking to some contacts and I got some ideas. He said, we got 2 motorcycles, 2 guys. We can put your family, split them between 2 motorcycles and they'll ride to the airport. So it's like 4-person motorcycle. I was like, are we really to that point yet? We're not taking any luggage. I understand that's an option, but are we really that's our only option? And he said, no, I got some other ideas. I'll look into some other things. I'm like, okay, because I hate for this to be a wash. We kind of came here to get some of your stuff, some of your belongings to go back. So if we could, I would really like to still be able to do that, so that at least was a success of this entire trip. So he's like, okay, I'll look into some things. Then, you can go ahead and play this next video. This is just me, as I've kind of, myself kind of collected. It's windy. Apologize for the wind. Okay, this is Monday morning. Right over there. I don't know if you can see somewhere right in there is where we got stopped this morning. You hear more about the story. Somewhere along there, you can see there's a road that travels right down through there that heads up that direction. That's about how far we made it. In the distance, I think from here, the airport is about 4 or 5 miles, I'm guessing. I can see the planes coming in, but they're quite a ways off. Right now, only the motos, the motorcycles, are the ones that are going back and forth because they can sit in and around barricades. And they're transporting people back and forth. Crisis, it's transportation, people that can't get through. Like I said, I apologize for the wind. I was on the phone. But I started calling the embassy, trying to figure out from the embassy. The embassy was beginning to evacuate non-essential personnel, and they were too busy and they couldn't help us, and it was scary. And I heard stories of different people that had gotten a helicopter. I was like, that would have been nice, but I didn't know that they had those contacts, because I would have loved a helicopter. Just land right here and we'll get on and get out. So my brother-in-law, he said, okay, I looked at Google Earth, and I'm looking at the little driveways, and I think these driveways line up that we can go around that barricade and get onto this other main road, which will take us to that bridge that I think is still open. So he said, you want to give it a shot? He said, Jeavon, let's you and I go and investigate it first before we gather up the whole family. I said, okay, let's do that. So we went, you can, next picture here. That's the next one. This is kind of like what the driveway looked like. It was just kind of like going in between buildings, and you're like, is there anything? Is this dead end? And we were just driving around through this, and then we came up to a guy who kind of motioned that he was hungry, and Gami gave him some food, and he said, hey, we're trying to get some people out. He said, oh yeah, it's clear that way. So he said, you watch here and we'll be back. Yep. So we went back, got our family, came back, and made it onto the main highway. Highway is a stretch, because every 1,000 yards, there was like a 1 foot cut in the entire concrete from one end to the other. Like they're eventually sometime going to put in some drainage, so you had to go off the road and then back onto the highway and then keep on going. But we went and we came up to another barricade, and there are people at this barricade, and he said, hold on, I got an idea. And this vehicle was kind of getting allowed to get around. They were allowing this vehicle, so he went up right on the vehicle and kind of allowed them to help get us through. And she's like, okay, great. So we kept on going. Then we get to another barricade, but that car did a U-turn and went back the other direction, so he did too. And we went and found another side road that looked similar like this. And at this point, he's trying to do stuff with his GPS and figure things out. And we get lost. And then he talks to some people, and they direct us, and we get back on another road. And we come up to another barricade, and he's trying to do the same thing, except 7 guys jump on our vehicle this time. And they start screaming, yelling, leaning into our vehicle and saying, no, you're not going anywhere. And they tell us, and he said, hey, he said the same thing. We have children here. And the reason that worked was because then there's anger there with the government, but they felt like the children shouldn't be a part of this. So him saying that, they had a little bit of grace, because the children, this is not a children affair. So they said, we'll go and we'll take you, but you'll pay us. Okay. So they jumped on motorcycles, had 2 guys jump on the back of our vehicle so we didn't go anywhere. So they were standing on the bumper holding on the top. And they said, let's go. Next picture. So that's us following this group of guys. That's the motorcycle in front of us. That's our gang member that was following us. I took that picture, and then the next picture. And then my brother-in-law is like, Jeavon, put your phone down. I'm like, you'll thank me later. I can't believe this is happening. I'm like, really, I just came here for a vacation. I cannot believe I'm living through this. So we get to another stop, another gang, and our gang started fighting that gang. A rock was picked up. They're going to throw it through a windshield, and our gang tackled this guy to keep him from hurting us. So our bodyguards were protecting us from this other gang members, and we made it through. And then they stopped us and said that bridge that we thought was open is no longer open. So they took us through the dry riverbed, and we made it up onto the other side. And then they stopped us and said, okay, you'll pay us now. Well, my brother-in-law Gami, he had a lot of experience. As we're driving, he was like, how much money you got, Jeavon? And we're going through, and he put all the money in a certain pocket and the rest of his money in different pockets so he could pull it out and say, this is all I got. And when they gave it to him, they're like, that's not enough. And he found a little bit more, and they said, okay, that'll do. And they let us through, and the police were right there around the corner, and we made it right to the airport. Yeah. I didn't know how this was going to turn out. At the beginning of that day, beginning of that trip, I didn't know how this was going to turn out. I was filled with fear of what was going to happen, what God would do. I would like to say, like, in hindsight, it sounds like a great adventure, and it is. But it's better now that we know that it had a happy ending, right? But I didn't know how it was going to turn out in the midst of it. That's the thing that we experience when we're going through a battle. When we're overcome with fear and we're crippled with fear, we don't know how it's going to turn out. And that is exactly what creates that fear. We don't know how it's going to end. The next point, that fear distorts reality. I think that was the last of the pictures. Fear distorts reality. Our fear distorts reality and creates monsters in the closet and obstacles. Makes things that are impossible mountain ranges and we just cannot pass because of this fear. I was wrecked with fear and had a knot in my stomach the whole time we were going through this. Reality is not found by what we can see and hear. Reality is not found by what we can see and hear. Our comfort comes from our true reality that's found in Jesus Christ. When I was in the midst of that fear and that anxiety, the knot in my stomach, I got up the next day because I said to myself, Lord, take this. I don't know how we're going to get out of this, but I do know that if I stay in this position in bed, nothing's going to get done. I need to lead my family out of this. And I hope I turn left instead of right, or right instead of left, and make the right decision. Because I don't know. But Lord, please be with me. I want to get my family out here safely. If you're wrestling with anxiety and fear, gather with a group of believers and pray. Gather with a group of believers. We're a family, and we need to lean on each other. When we're going through stuff like that, you can't do it alone. We're in a spiritual battle, and some spiritual battles, we'll pray, but then there's some spiritual battles that are far bigger than us. You need lots of people to gather around you for these spiritual battles. Mark 9, chapter 28 through 29 says, afterwards, when Jesus was alone in the house with his disciples, they asked him, why couldn't we cast out the evil spirit? Jesus replied, this kind can be cast out only by prayer. Fear and anxiety have deep roots, and they can only be removed by prayer. You need the church, you need the body to be praying over you. If there's something that you just it just keeps coming back and it just keeps coming back, you need prayer because the roots are deep. And set aside pride. Pride keeps us from getting help when we have fear. And that's why I shared this story, to help hopefully make it easier for everyone here to also share their stories where they might feel anxiety and fear. Because Pride sets up a trap that we can no longer get out of the trap that we're in, and we become isolated, alone, and even more fearful. So look, if I can do this, I'm recording in front of all of you guys, you can do it too. Share with each other, with a group of people, small group of people. Scripture says where 2 or 3 are gathered, that's where he is. So grab a group of people and say, I need some help. Please pray for me. What's awesome is that, and we're not going to go into the chapter, but just at the end, when Elijah makes it to Mount Sinai, it says that the earthquake, the fire, the wind came. But God wasn't in any of those, that the Lord arrived in a gentle whisper. He was kind, gentle, compassionate. Anyone that's wrestling with PTSD and fear and anxiety would greatly appreciate a calm, gentle whisper. Because when you're wrestling with that kind of anxiety, loud noises actually create more anxiety. But that's not how God came, because he knows how to approach someone who's deep in fear and worry and anxiety. He came in a gentle whisper. So I want all of us to stand up, and I want us to say this verse together for ourselves. Isaiah chapter 41, verse 10. Say it with me. Don't be afraid, for I am with you. Don't be discouraged, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will hold you up with my victorious right hand. Stay standing. If you are riddled with fear and anxiety, if you're riddled with fear and anxiety, there is no shame in that. Don't stay there. Don't hold on to that a moment longer. The worship team can go ahead and come on up. The altar is open. If there are things that you need to set at the altar, say, I don't want to hold on to this one more moment. I'm going to leave it at the altar, so that when the enemy comes and says lies to you and starts to speak into you, you can remind him that you've already put it at the feet of Jesus. But then don't stop there. You need to go and lean on other believers, because you can't do it alone. We were never meant to walk this alone. If you feel that tug and burden on your heart, that pounding, you're like, if I come forward, I might look silly. My pride is difficult. I don't want it to look pride. Set the pride aside. That's a trap. If there's something heavy on your heart and you need to come, and you feel that tug on your heart, be obedient to that. That's the gentle whisper from the Lord saying, come.